Now a Storm Team 2 special presentation. Our storms, our stories.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Storm Team 2 Chief Meteorologist Rob Fowler. Our annual season of stress has begun here in the Low Country. Hurricane season is back after a record-shattering year in 2020. While we emerged relatively unscathed from the historic 30-name storms last year, previous years we weren't as lucky. Here on our hurricane-prone coast, you'll find that everyone has a story about a storm. They likely have a few. Join Storm Team 2 over the next half hour as we explore our storied past with hurricanes, old, new, forgotten, and unforgettable. We begin with a disaster, not of destruction, but delays for the Palmetto State. Storm Team 2 meteorologist Josh Marthers has this story.
September 1999, 10 years after Hugo.
This is a Storm Team 2 Hurricane Update.
Floyd. Measuring nearly 600 miles across, Floyd triggered the then largest peacetime evacuation in American history. First Florida, still reeling from Andrew's destruction at the beginning of the decade. Then Georgia, finally followed by the Carolinas as Floyd made a sharp right-hand turn, aiming its deadly eye for our coast.
Simply take I-526 west to I-26 west and follow that out of the threatened area.
It just wasn't that simple. Nearly 400,000 South Carolinians fled at the same time, joining millions already on the road from Georgia and Florida, creating a nightmare on I-26.
From James Island to Columbia was about 12 hours.
14 hours from Mount Pleasant to Greenville.
Over 11 hours.
It took us 23 hours to go from West Ashley to Seneca, South Carolina.
With 3 people and 5 cats in a small Honda Civic.
These stories of normally 2-hour trips taking 10+ hours aren't unusual. Hundreds of you shared similar experiences on Facebook.
I don't even know if my husband ever pressed the gas pedal. I think we idled.
Dead stop.
Emotions were running high.
Worrisome at first, then a lot of frustrations.
Extreme boredom.
I mean, it was a nightmare. And then we were all, of course, sitting there parked and looking at this empty lane on the other side of the interstate, and nobody could get over to it.
There was no lane reversal plan that could be implemented in short order. Governor Hodges at the time actually flew down to Charleston and met with Mayor Riley. And Mayor Riley expressed his frustration over those 2 empty lanes.
It should have never happened, and both sides of the interstate should have been open.
When lane reversals finally did happen, it was too late. Floyd had already lost strength and continued north, sparing Charleston with just a strong breeze and heavy rain. Thousands of evacuees returned home to find no damage, cementing their decision they made stuck in traffic days earlier.
I never wanted to evacuate again.
None of us have ever evacuated since.
The overwhelming majority of you said the same thing. You'll never leave again after the Floyd fiasco. But here's the thing. It will likely never happen again because of the lane reversal plan. The first lane reversals since Floyd for Matthew and Dorian went as smooth as could be expected, thanks to a tried and tested plan that ensures that lanes are reversed as soon as the governor gives the order.
I'm issuing a mandatory evacuation.
Those orders now come days earlier, ensuring that there's enough time for everyone wishing to leave can do so safely and swiftly. In addition, officials now keep an eye on traffic across state lines to ensure that a bottleneck doesn't occur in Columbia, even as our coastal populations rise. In the end, it's your decision to leave. But remember, we were spared by Floyd. That may not be the case next time, as those who survived Hugo can attest.
Thanks, Josh. I am here at what we considered ground zero for Hurricane Hugo that night of September 21st and the morning of the 22nd, the Francis Marion National Forest. I'll tell you what, in a blink of a hurricane's eye, we lost about 75% of the timber, either trees knocked down completely or sheared in half. I thought it was bad where I was at the National Weather Service that night, but you can only imagine what it was like for someone who was here in the forest that night when the winds gusted to maybe as high as 175 miles per hour.
As the night came on, the winds just gradually picked up, and it just simply increased to a level that none of us ever expected to happen.
Craig Watson, his wife, and their less than a year-old child huddled alongside 3 other families inside their home in the heart of the forest as Hugo's winds howled outside.
We were right in the eye wall of that hurricane for a long period of time. There were trees snapping all around us, and you could hear those loud pops all night long. You know, we were afraid for our lives at many times, and we never slept.
The next morning, they ventured out. The smell of pine strong, the winds finally calm.
None of us in the house there could believe the damage that occurred to the forest. We just thought it was almost impossible for something like that to happen. The second day after the hurricane hit, the forest supervisor flew over the national forest. It's very emotional. He just said, "Craig, it's all blown down. It's blown down. It's gone." And those that weren't down were twisted or broken. But literally every road on the national forest was blocked, even the major highways going through the national forest. No one could get to us, and we couldn't get out.
Wow.
So it took us 5 days to cut our way out of the forest to make a 1-lane road out to Monk's Corner. And that was just my story, you know. We were without power for 21 days.
The forest recovery would take much longer. These felled trees were more than just timber. They were homes for the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. The Francis Marion had the densest population of these birds in the country until Hugo.
We lost over half of the birds and 90% of the trees in one night. And that was an extreme blow to the recovery of the red-cockaded woodpecker.
Watson spent the next 8 years with the Forestry Service rebuilding habitats for this bird, whose numbers have recovered, much like the forest itself. As we all know, it takes years and years to rebuild something like the Francis Marion National Forest. That doesn't happen overnight. But just like rebuilding Charleston, the community came together. In this case, we're talking about elementary and middle school students who, on this spot, more than 30 years ago, planted the loblolly pines that now tower behind me. For those trees that did survive Hurricane Hugo, boy, do they have a story to tell. There are clues hidden in these belts of bark for us, the meteorologists, to understand weather of the past, climate of the past, and especially hurricanes of the past. Storm Team 2 meteorologist David Dixon is here to explain.
Most of us know that you can figure out a tree's age by counting its rings, and while that is true, dendrochronologists like Thomas Patterson can use them to find details about the weather over the years.
However suitable the environment is on a given year, the tree will grow more. And if the environmental conditions are not suitable for growth, the tree will grow less. So how we interpret this is we look at growth rings. And when growth rings are larger, like just a wider band, we relate that to things like more rainfall.
Or warmer temperatures, while thinner rings indicate more extreme events, such as drought, tornadoes, or forest fires. Once cut and sanded, we can study the tree's rings, counting down the years, decades, centuries, while taking notes and measurements on any trends that stand out.
You had this cluster of years that were all really narrow. And likely what happened is the tree underwent some sort of a stress or trauma.
Which is exactly what happened in 1989, Hugo.
Think about what happens in a hurricane. High-speed winds. This tree could have suffered branch damage, leaves would have been stripped off.
Leaving the tree damaged, putting it into repair mode with suppressed growth for several years afterwards, illustrated in these thin bands. The work is meticulous, frustrating at times, but the findings make it worth it. There's climate data here dating back to when weather record keeping began in Charleston. Past hurricanes are detailed in these faded and wavy lines. And with a fair amount of science, trees can actually talk to us.
That's the root of it, pun intended.
Down in Edisto, signs of a long-lost community remain. All that's left of Eddingsville Beach, a once thriving summer vacation spot in the pre-war South, forever lost underneath the waves.
So Eddingsville, we like to call the Low Country Atlantis. Eddingsville Beach, as we know it today, is the shoreline just south of us. But if you look in the history books, Eddingsville of the 1800s is 3/4 of a mile out underneath the ocean.
200 years ago, it was part of our shoreline, a small barrier island similar to Sullivan's Island, Folly Beach, or many of the islands down near Edisto. Wealthy plantation families started settling in Eddingsville in the early 1800s, crossing a lone oyster shell causeway to get onto the island with all of their belongings for a summer, away from the heat and mosquitoes further inland. It grew in popularity through the 19th century, with roughly 50 houses, as Eberson Murray, one of the community's last residents, recalled in his memoir years later.
Life on Ettingsville was ideal. Behind the big white sand dunes was the house lots, shaded by oaks and cedars. Most of these buildings were substantial two-story structures, with wide verandas facing the ocean. Unfortunately, however, Ettingsville was too good to last. As the assaults of the ocean did more and more damage to the sand dunes, little by little the people abandoned their summer homes.
Ettingsville's catastrophic conclusion came in 1885 when an unnamed hurricane battered the community.
The water rose higher and higher. That night, both of the front beach houses collapsed. This was the end of the village of Ettingsville. No one dared to live on the Barrow Islands after that terrible experience.
Abandoned, any last remnants of Ettingsville were wiped away less than a decade later with the infamous Sea Island hurricane of 1893. Erosion finished the job, pushing the shoreline back further and further from the now non-existent community. Today, relics of bone, glass, and ceramics still sometimes wash ashore on beaches that soon may suffer the same fate. Look no further than Botany Bay, another barrier island near Edisto.
This shoreline is a great example of what was happening to Ettingsville back in the 1800s. Between 1963 and about 2015, there's been over 900 feet of erosion right here at Botany Bay.
Stories often repeat themselves. Ettingsville, Botany Bay, Folly, all fighting a losing battle against erosion, both from the state of our shoreline as well as hurricanes. Beach renourishment after storms will help slow the process, but as seen 150 years ago,
the main lesson about Ettingsville is that coastal communities aren't permanent.
While the legend of Ettingsville is real with physical evidence, our next story's authenticity relies on whether or not you believe in the paranormal. That ghostly tale is coming up next. Welcome back. When a hurricane threatens our coast, many look for reassurance that their families and their property will stay safe. For some, that sign may come from the other side of the veil. A visit from the Gray Man of Pawleys Island.
Oh, the Gray Man, yes. Well, everybody who's ever lived here for any length of time knows it.
There have been so many sightings, so many people that otherwise are not storytellers, are not foolish or superstitious, that will say they saw someone who was there and appeared to be pointing, appeared to be holding a hand to say stop or leave.
Warning the people that a hurricane's coming.
The Gray Man has almost always been described by those who claim they've seen him about the same. A gray figure with a jacket and trousers and a hat. And the Gray Man does seem to appear when there is a storm whipping up, and the legend continues to be that he is serving as a warning, and if you heed that warning, not only will you live, but your property will be safe. And those that have claimed to see it, the Gray Man, have come back and found that their beach house, even the clothes on the laundry line, are preserved. And who's to argue with those who say they believe, even if you don't? In 1893, there were reports of a gray figure having been seen in that large storm, Friday the 13th. And then throughout the 20th century, the stories seemed to gain speed after there were published accounts. The day of Hurricane Hugo, September 21st, Jim and Clara Moore, like many of us, took one last walk on the beach before 12 noon when the Sheriff's Department ordered that all residents, all visitors, be off the island. And they didn't necessarily believe in ghosts, but they've always said that day, just before evacuation, they saw something or someone that was there one moment and the next was not. Jim and Clara Moore say, "We don't know if it was the Gray Man, but we saw something or someone, and we certainly heeded the warning." I know there are people that wait until the last minute, partly because they want to see what the waves are doing. They want to see how strong the wind gets. They want to see how high the water gets. And perhaps they stay because they want to see the Gray Man. But I advise people to get out and get out early, because there is a chance you may not get out at all. I think ghost stories, again, are entertaining. I think they do teach history and ecology, meteorology in many cases, and the value of that alone is important to me and important to so many others, must be, because they're still telling the stories here at Pawleys Island.
Behind me is Shem Creek, safe enough harbor for fishing boats during the event of a hurricane. But for one large ship during Hurricane Hugo, there is no time, no place to safely dock. So the captain and the crew had to ride out the historic storm in the middle of the Cooper River. Step aboard the RV Palmetto, a research vessel used by SCDNR to bring marine scientists out to open water to study sea life. It's normally docked in this slip on Fort Johnson, but the night of Hugo, it was leashed to pilings in open water upriver.
So we put our couple of sets of lines on those, and wow, we got lucky. You know, this is a good spot.
For the first half of Hugo, it was. The direction of the wind pushed them against the pilings, but that would change as the eye passed and the wind shifted.
I saw our bow line fly up in the air, and you know, the landscape changed, you know, we broke loose.
The rest of the night was spent restlessly maneuvering the ship into the wind, praying that the engines wouldn't give out.
You could hear the engine screaming. You know, we had no idea how hard we were running them. Just, we had to do enough to turn into that wind.
It is up the Cooper River about 3 or 4 miles north of the Navy base.
The next morning, they worked their way downriver.
There were sailboats in the trees, shrimp boats that had sunk, pleasure boats, you know, that were in the marsh or halfway sunk. I mean, it was awful. And we got back to Fort Johnson, and that was when the exchange of, you know, oh, you guys saved us so much. You guys did such a great, well, you know, you're welcome, but don't look for that again.
And they haven't since.
The policy that the state has come up with to keeping family and crew and employees first over equipment is probably the best call, you know.
Both captains say to follow their lead. Dock your boat and then leave it, as your life is much more valuable than your property.
While the crew of the RV Palmetto thankfully didn't have to be rescued, others have not been as lucky. At the Charleston Coast Guard Air Facilities hangar, a wall of vibrant orange lines the railing. Each one of these life jackets is a rescue, a story. Souls saved by the helicopter rescue swimmer team here. Josh Marthers has the story of one of those rescue swimmers.
You may recognize Shannon Scaff from previous hurricane seasons. That's because he's the Director of Emergency Management for the City of Charleston. His journey to that position involved Floyd, dramatic water rescues, and of course, Hurricane Hugo. A teenager in Somerville in 1989, Hugo stayed with him.
And could smell salt air all the way that far inland.
Influencing his decision he'd make years later when watching a Coast Guard exercise in the Charleston Harbor.
It just looked remarkable, and pretty much made a decision right there on the spot. That's what I wanted to commit myself to.
After mentally, physically, and emotionally grueling training, he became a rescue swimmer with the Coast Guard. His first hurricane on assignment was Floyd, because while our experience with Floyd was hours-long traffic jams, North Carolina was devastated.
I showed up to my swimmer shop and sort of posed a question, does somebody want to tell me what's happening? And they said, we've got thousands of people on rooftops and trees. All told, our air crew rescued 100 people and a dog. And I would say that just about every person that I rescued, they all had the same look on their faces. They were all 100% surprised that they had found themselves being escorted by me and placed into a rescue basket and hoisted out of chest-deep water. None of them would have guessed 24 hours prior to that they were going to find themselves in a situation where they're on a rooftop or in a tree hanging on for dear life, but ultimately that's what happened. And you know, what I ask folks as the Director of Emergency Management is to think about those individuals that may have to risk their lives to come and get you.
Disconnecting hoist hook.
Schaff carries that insight in his current role along with other skills such as risk assessment and resource management.
All of those things are pulled directly from my experiences as a Coast Guard swimmer.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with the forecast for this hurricane season.
As we close the chapters of our previous storms, we look to what this season may bring. While we do not know what stories will come from this year, we do know that the established script is being rewritten, at least when it comes to naming hurricanes.
Right, Rob. The World Meteorological Organization has officially decided that the Greek alphabet is out, no longer using it when the season's list of 21 names runs out. They found it to be distracting from communicating the threats of an approaching storm.
Which we saw last year with Zeta and Eta back to back. It could be confusing. Now, if the standard A to Z, excluding Q, U, X, Y, and Z list is finished, future storms will be named based on a supplemental list of names, starting with A and ending with W. We hope that it doesn't come to that, but forecasters are predicting another active season.
However, experts are not expecting this season to be as active as last year. Rob, we had the perfect recipe for a blockbuster season. 30 named storms last year. And this year, things still look pretty active, but I really don't think, and we really don't want it to be as bad as last year.
But no matter what this season will bring, you can count on us to be there for you. As year after year, hurricanes come and go, leaving destruction that lasts just as long as it takes to clean it up. But the stories from these storms last forever,
impacting our actions and plans for decades after.
While legends long lost can show a glimpse of our future.
Others illustrating our need to be told that our belongings will be safe.
From all of us here at Storm Team 2, we hope that this season will be short-lived and the stories boring. Have a great weekend and a safe hurricane season.